So we're going to start off this presentation with a little bit of background for those of you who participated in Dr. Mary Lusk's presentation on TMDLs and the US Clean Water Act. This will be a bit of a review, but it is necessary to go over so that you sort of have the foundation and understanding of Basin Management Action Plans. So the US Clean Water Act is a federal act that was established in 1972 and run through the Environmental Protection Agency. And it regulates the discharge of pollutants into surface waters of the United States. And it requires a permit for point source discharges, and this is through the NPDES program, or the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System program. And it delegates authority to the individual states to run the pollution reduction programs at the state level. In the state of Florida, this is done through the Florida Watershed Restoration Act, which was established in 1999. So it regulates the total maximum daily load program, which is essentially the pollution reduction program that is required by the Federal Clean Water Act. In the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection is the lead agency, and it controls both point source, which is regulated through the Clean Water Act, but also non-point source discharges. An amendment to that act in 2005 formally established the Basin Management Action Plans as part of the TMDL program. So the US Clean Water Act requires the states to develop and determine whether or not water qualities are impaired. And these list of impaired surface waters is known as the 303D list. And essentially what it is it determines if a water body is meeting its designation. And so it uses water quality standards based off of the type of water body that it is. So whether it's a lake, a stream, a spring, or an estuary, and what its designated use is. In the state of Florida, most of our surface waters are designated as Class 3 waters. So what that means is that they're primarily used for recreation. We also often sort of casually refer to that as being swimmable or fishable waters, but it's also necessary to maintain healthy fish and wildlife populations. The TMDL, or Total Maximum Daily Load program, is essentially that determinant of how much of a pollutant can be added into a water body in order for it to still meet its designated use. And so for those impaired waters, it's the maximum amount of that pollutant that's allowed in a water body so that the water body can still meet its water quality standards. It is scientifically based, meaning that water quality data is required in order to determine a TMDL. And it sets sort of a restoration goal for the individual water body. We have a lot of TMDLs in the state, thousands of them. And you can see that I've listed sort of the top 5 pollutants in the state. So we have the most for mercury, then total nitrogen and total phosphorus, which are our nutrients, fecal coliform, and then biochemical oxygen demand. And that's essentially a means of determining how healthy a water body is by how much oxygen is necessary to have the natural breakdown of organic matter. So you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, the purple blotches are state adopted and federally approved TMDLs. And the red circles are ones that have been adopted by the state but have not yet been approved by the federal government. It's also important to note that the TMDL program, at least sort of on an individual water body level, is primarily done for total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and biochemical oxygen demand. We do have statewide TMDLs for mercury and developing them for fecal coliform. So rather than having those being done at the individual water body level, those are done at the statewide level. The framework for TMDL looks like this, and it is an adaptive framework. And essentially from sort of looking at number 2 through number 6, it's done in a 5-year rotation. So first what you need to do is you need to be able to evaluate a water body and determine what class it is and whether it's meeting those standards. So again, in this case for surface waters, it's primarily this class 3 surface water standards. Again, this is science-based, so you need to do monitoring and collect water quality data to be able to determine and assess whether the water body is meeting that classification and or whether or not it is impaired. If it's recognized as impaired by the state and approved by the Environmental Protection Agency, then a TMDL is developed. And this sets the target restoration, again, for those pollutants that have been identified. A Basin Management Action Plan is then established and implemented as a means of getting to that restoration target. And each of this is sort of, again, adaptive management, and those BMAPs and TMDLs and water quality are all evaluated over time on a 5-year schedule to make sure we're meeting our needs, but also being able to incorporate any changes or updates that we might have in the scientific process. So what are Basin Management Action Plans? They're a site-specific guiding document that identifies activities to achieve that total maximum daily load, or that amount of pollutant that can be added while still meeting that water body's classification. And it's site-specific because not all water bodies are created equal. So you need to be able to account for the individual water quality problems, what that pollutant is, again, whether it's nutrients, nitrogen and or phosphorus, whether it's fecal coliform, whether it's a heavy metal. You need to be able to adapt for the different land uses in the area and the various pollutant sources, the stakeholders in that location and who are the contributors to that pollutant, as well as sort of the physical aspects of the site, the geography, hydrology, and then perhaps not most importantly, but in terms of actually implementing a basin management plan, you need to have economic resources in order to implement these restoration activities. So it is a collaborative process, and it's developed through public meetings and formal workshops. Within the state of Florida, again, the Department of Environmental Protection is the lead agency with the water management districts. But the Basin Management Action Plans also include local governments, the Water Management District if they are not a coordinating agency, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, any other state agencies that have a stake, soil and water conservation districts, environmental groups, regulated interests, affected pollution sources, and any other interested parties. So these really are collaborative as a means of getting the best available information. The process for a BMAP, first you need to identify and quantify the sources of that pollutant for which there is a TMDL. And then responsibility is allocated out equitably. So essentially you look at who is responsible for being a source of that pollutant, and you determine how much each of those stakeholders are responsible for reducing. You develop strategies and projects to meet the reductions by the individual stakeholders or responsibilities. And then a monitoring plan needs to be established as part of the process in order to measure progress towards meeting the TMDL. This includes an implementation schedule with milestones, and generally, again, if you recall, the TMDL process is a 5-year process. So most of the BMAPs have milestones every 5 years. And they usually are 15 to 20-year plans. So you're having this sort of adaptive management every 5 years for 15 to 20 years. And identify financial resources, again, as we mentioned previously. It's important to note and recognize that this process in the TMDLs, looking at that 5-year cycle, it's a really long-term process with every single one of those steps, whether it's collecting data, assessing the water quality, implementing a TMDL, developing a BMAP, and implementing the BMAP and assessing it. That's long-term, with each of those individual steps taking a minimum of a year. They're also extremely costly, which is why identifying financial resources are part of the BMAP process. So Basin Management Action Plans, the actual management strategies, or what are the activities that are done to reduce a given pollutant, those are vary pretty widely. So again, for those point sources, you have permitting and other existing regulatory programs that are going to be rolled into part of that management strategy. It's also important to note, when we talk about other existing regulatory programs, it's not necessarily permitting. There might be other sort of state statutes that exist to protect water quality that also need to sort of roll within the BMAP. So for example, in the outstanding Florida Springs watershed, there's a Florida state statute that addresses that. And so specific rules in that statute need to be incorporated into the BMAP. In South Florida, we have the Northern Estuaries and Everglades Protection Plan. So projects and plans as part of NEP are also part of making the BMAP successful. You have non-regulatory and incentive-based programs. And so those are best management practices that have been formally adopted by secretarial order. And once they've become formally adopted, they are enforceable. You have cost-sharing programs, waste minimization programs, pollution prevention programs, as well as public education. In areas where cannot meet sort of the pollutant minimization with these non-regulatory and regulatory programs, trading for water quality credits is part of a management strategy and can be achieved and accomplished, as well as public work projects and land acquisition. So what do we mean by compliance and enforcement? Well, for point sources, you have the regulatory programs such as the NPDES and other permitting compliance. You have, for non-agricultural non-point sources, you have best management practices, water quality monitoring, or water quality credit trades, which allow you to meet that compliance. And FDEP or the Water Management District would be the enforcing agency there. For agricultural non-point sources, you have the option to implement either best management practices as signed with a notice of intent, or water quality monitoring. And that's regulated instead of through DEP and the Water Management District, that's regulated through FDEX. But it's important to note that each of these stakeholders who are responsible for a pollutant allocation, they need to provide reasonable assurance that they have enough project credits in the BMAP through all of the different strategies and activities that they've identified to be able to achieve their required reductions. And so this is where enforcement comes in. If they're not meeting compliance with any of the listed activities there, or if they don't have enough project credits, then enforcement can occur. This is just a list, an image of the existing BMAPs within the state. So that bright green color shows the adopted BMAPs, and that more light green color shows the pending BMAPs. So we currently have 36 adopted BMAPs, the first of which was adopted in 2008. And most recently, we've had 3 that were adopted in 2020. And then we have 5 pending BMAPs in the outstanding Florida Springs area.